Hi, I am Danielle Crohn Guiffrey, and I sew portraits out of thread, DMC floss, cotton floss. I can also sew portraits out of silk floss, and I sew it on this material, which is called Ada cloth, and I sew it stitch by stitch, square by square. 18 count means small little tiny squares, which makes it a pixelated art. And so, for example, this particular piece right here is 20 inches by 32 and a half inches, tall and wide, and it constitutes 72 pages of pattern. A pattern looks like this, and inside the pattern you have all of the stitches, stitch by stitch, and the symbols that go with each color. And so you can create a pixelated portrait out of different colored thread. I will be very quickly going through the portraits that I have for sale for the art crawl. This first one is called The Little Thief. It is a reproduction of a famous painting called The Little Thief by Adolphe William Bouguereau. And this one is 16 and a half inches by 30 inches. It took 1,600 hours to sew, and it is available for purchase. This one is called Vendeuse. So in French, she is called Le Mauvaise, which we translate as the little thief. I'm assuming because she has a pear in her hand, which means that she might have stolen the pear from an orchard. Perhaps she was hungry. This one is La Vendeuse, which means grape picker. And this one is also a reproduction of a painting by William Adolphe Bouguereau. And it is cotton floss on Ada cloth, and it is 20 by 32 and a half inches. And it took 1,760 hours to sew. And that one is also available for purchase. I would like to move over here and tell you what these girls mean to me. So, something I began to do is to work with commissioned portraits. The difference between the portraits that I just showed you and, for example, this portrait is that I purchased the patterns to those, and this pattern I created myself. So what I did is I took a photograph. This is the photograph of my niece, Gwendolyn. And with this photograph, I was able to use a computer program called ProStitch 9. And with that program, I was able to create a pattern, a pixelated pattern, which in color looked like this. So each one of these squares in the pattern are a color that is represented by a color of floss. The floss color options, there are about 500, 600 different colors of floss that you can buy in a single color. You can also multiply that by infinity if you take one thread of one color and another thread of another color, which creates a new shade. And so I was able to, the computer will choose its own colors, but you have to print it out and then you have to tweak. And so, for example, I actually chose a different entire background around her face than I did for her face. So, and then I cut around the pattern to what I was working on is this part right here actually looked like a big bump in her head because of the color. And so what I did is I created a way to put a little pink around here so that it would cover up that and not make it look like a bump in her head. And so I can do all kinds of touch-ups that way with any photograph that you would have. And that is how I work commissions. So I'll talk a little bit more about commissions in a second, but I just wanted you to know that this is an original portrait and that is an original pattern. And so when I work with an original pattern, if you'd like to purchase a commission, I work on the pattern first. Then once you approve the pattern, I would give you an example. For example, I wouldn't cut it apart like this, but you would have an entire color example of what it would look like before it would be sewn. And then you would approve that, and then I would sew it. This particular portrait took 800 sewing hours and about 100 pattern hours. So it would work similar. It's similar to purchasing a mural. So someone who would plan to paint a mural would first get the pattern approved and then paint the mural. And so that is how I work the contracts. For example, if you were to commission a portrait of your daughter, or your son, or your grandma, or your grandpa, or your partner, or your pet, that is how I would arrange a portrait commission. This particular portrait is Elizabeth. I do not, so for example, Elizabeth, before I sewed her, this was what it looked like before I sewed it. And then the pattern looked similar to this. And that's what I use. So there is no pattern on the actual cloth. I have to count across and use counting to figure out what goes in each square. This particular portrait, the mother wanted to use at least 100 different colors. And so I used 72 full colors. And I also created 31 blends. So there were 100 different colors in her portrait. The more colors there are, the more detail it's going to be. And it is meant to be pixelated, so it is meant to be looked at from afar. Up close, it's going to look like anything that's pixelated. It's not meant to be looked at up close, but I am going to give you a little bit of a glimpse of the difference between this and a painting. It has texture. It really has texture, and the colors really add a lot of difference. And so you can see each one of those millimeter by millimeter squares really makes a difference. So I do the custom, I can change the color square by square if I choose. So that is how that works. The framing would be a separate purchase. These are stretched, framed, and matted, and the glass is UV protective glass so that the threads do not fade. If you use a protective UV glass, even if it were in the sun, which you probably wouldn't want anyway, it's not as beautiful in the sun with the sun, the way the lights are reflecting off the glass. But even if it were, the glass would protect the dyes from fading. So these three particular portraits are all reproductions of paintings painted by Alexey Alexeyevich Harlamov. And so these are real children he painted, and I purchased the patterns for them, so I did not create the patterns for these, but I did sew them. And so this one is called the Young Brunette, and it is available for purchase. It's 13.75 inches across and 16.5 inches down. And it is called Young Brunette, and it took 840 hours to sew. This one is called The Girl with the Red Kerchief, and I put them next to each other. I used this idea of how Gwendolyn was posing for the portrait. We made many portraits of her, many photographs of her before we chose one. but I chose this one in particular just to show how amazing it looks. This child lived over 100 years ago, and probably 100 years from now, this portrait will exist, and maybe it will be my niece's grandchildren who will have it on their wall. And so I think that's quite amazing. So this one is called The Girl with Red Kerchief. It is also reproduction, and it's 13 and a half by 18 and a half, 13 and a half inches by 18 and a quarter inches, and it took 880 hours to sew. It is available for purchase. I would give a discount if someone were to purchase all three of the children, of the girls, by the Harlemoff portraits. And then I'm going to move over here. I think that's what I needed to say. Yes, Elizabeth's portrait, sewn portrait, you can see a picture of it on my Stitching Gears Facebook page. It's a public page, and that is where I have photographed all of these with price. I will put my price list on that public page, and so that you can see them close up. Her finished product, the photo is on there, so you can see what it looked like when it was finished. Her mother has it. That's the idea of the commission, is that you will own it. There will only be one. It is unique in the world unless you decide to ask me to sew another one. No one else will have a pattern. It cannot be reproduced. So it's 100% original. These two are also for purchase. I want to get over here. Maybe I don't know if this is going to work. But, alright, so this one, yeah, see the lighting? I'm so apologize for the lighting on this one. That one is, these two here are, maybe if I turn this over just a little bit. Yeah, there we go. Those two are my two Van Goghs that I sewed. Sorry about the reflections in there from the lamp. It is very hard to do lighting with glass. The one on top is called Starry Night, Nuit Étoilée in French, and that is a reproduction, and so I did not create the pattern. However, it is for sale, it is for purchase. So it is 16 and 3/4 inches wide and 13 inches tall. It took 800 hours to sew, and it is available for purchase. The one below is also a Van Gogh reproduction. I really hate the way the lights reflect in there. I made it worse. Sorry. Breathe. So obviously they do have glass on them, and so they are protected, but that is why they're so hard to photograph. This one is called Cafe Terrace. And Cafe Terrace, or Cafe Terrace at Night, is also by Vincent Van Gogh reproduction, and it's 12 1/4 inches across and 16 1/4 inches tall, and it will be available for purchase, and it took 740 hours to sew. So those are the ones that are available for purchase. The only two that are not are the only one that is not actually will be Gwendolyn. That is the portrait that I sewed of my niece, and she will own it when she is older. She was 5 in that portrait, and she's 13 now. So that was some time ago that I sewed that. The last thing I want to share, since I'm on this side, I'm going to turn this here so hopefully you can see it a little bit better. Okay, the last thing I want to share is there are so many possibilities of commissions. That is really what this is about, is if you have a portrait, these are some portraits I would like to work on next. These are other portraits that we took of Gwendolyn, my niece, and I would probably do them as large as the ones, as the grape picker that you saw in the beginning. So that would take time. Here's some more portraits. These are just ideas. to give you an idea, if you look through your, I could also do black and whites. So black and white portrait is possible. These are all black and white because there's so many shades of gray and ways for me to make blends. It might be just as beautiful as a black and white portrait. Plus with Photoshop, we could always work on turning it into a color photograph. Here's just some more ideas. I can do abstracts. These are photographs I took with water and glass myself, so they are original portraits, original photos, excuse me, that I could turn into, oh, look at that one fell. So these are also more ideas, black and white or color portraits that I've just collected over time. Here's an example of a beautiful portrait I could sew of a pet. And this was my pet, that was my cat. Anything that is colorful and interesting to you, I can sew. It does not have to be a portrait. And so that is just some ideas. And then quickly before I go, I can show you my work in progress so you can kind of see what it looks like. This is what I'm going to sew. I have started with a small, it's going to be even almost the size of the Van Gogh, so it's a rather small work. The smaller and less hours it would take, the less detail there will be. A portrait size will have just the right detail to bring out all of the shading and beauty of a portrait of a loved one or a pet. But a smaller one might be okay. So this is really going to be the size of this whole. You can see here's part of the eye right there in the middle. I always start in the middle and work out. So as you can see, in terms of size, this is really how small the stitches are and why it takes so many hours to sew. Each one of those little X's up here in the top is a sewn stitch. And so basically the process is quite simple. This one is not 72 pages, it is, I think it's 8 pages, maybe 12, 8. It's 8 pages. So this is just one of the 8 pages. As you can see, here is the eye. And then these would be the two lines that you saw that were sewn. So that gives you a little bit more of a clue to the dimension. So each one of these little squares has a symbol. Each one of those symbols represents a color. Each one of these is one of the colors. I find the symbol, then I know what color to sew with. And it also has blends because I chose the colors in this pattern. I'm making my own pattern from the photograph. So this is not a pattern that I bought. It's a pattern that I created, and I messed with the colors. I chose a lot of my own blends, and it's going to reflect my color choices. So I think that's about all I want to show you today. I wanted to keep this kind of short and sweet. Sorry about the crazy lighting, but the editing options are limited, and I didn't want too many reflections in the glass, so that's kind of what it is. So here we go. I'm going to give you quickly here some ways to contact me. I'm going to turn this, make sure you have enough light to see here on the screen. I have 2 ways for you to contact me. If you do have Facebook, Stitching Gears, if you just type in Stitching, STITCHING GEARS, all one word, into the search of Facebook, you will find my public Facebook page, and you can either ask to enter, or if you've already had a Facebook page for at least 3 months, you will automatically be able to see the page. That is the only requirement, is that you've already had a Facebook profile for 3 months. I have no other way around that. I apologize. I'm working on a website, but we do one thing at a time. And so also, if you do not have Facebook, which is completely fine, You can also email me at KISAGOTAMI07, that's a 007, not 007, just 107, 07, at gmail.com. So again, KISAGOTAMI07 at gmail.com. And you can talk to me about commissions if you're interested in purchasing one of the portraits or pictures that I have just introduced. They are all for sale except for Gwendolyn, the portrait of my niece. And if you're interested in commissions, we can talk about how we set up the commission plans. There are payment plans. There are different ways we can work together to make sure that I create a pattern that is exactly the pixelated version of your photograph. I also work with a photographer in my building. I live in Lower Town, St. Paul, and I work with a photographer here. So if you preferred to have a portrait session first and then gear the portraits towards, kind of plan ahead, and you want a portrait of this style. That's kind of what we did with Elizabeth and her mom, is we went to take pictures of her, and her mother wanted a portrait of her with a pensive, not pensive, but thinking, not a happy, smiley, open mouth, joyous face. She wanted her to be contemplative and thinking, and so we were able to choose this portrait out of many that we took outdoors with Elizabeth, and then her mother chose this one, and I sewed the portrait with lots of love and care. And so I appreciate your time. I try to keep this short and sweet, and I will probably put up one more video during the month just to give you a demonstration. So I'll just sit down and I will sew the next part of this. Also, you can see me this Sunday at the Lower Town Art Fair in front of CHS Field, which is in Lower Town. It's a baseball field, so right in the plaza in front of the baseball field, I will have a few of my portraits, and I will be available for commissions, or we can work out purchase. We can talk about all of those things in more detail. So come and see me on this Sunday, September 27th. Yeah, September 27th. This Sunday, September 27th, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. at CHS Field at the Lower Town Art Market. You can also look up Lower Town Art Market. They have a Facebook page, and you can find out more details at their Facebook page. Thank you so much for spending time with me and learning about the thread art, pixelated art that I do. I hope to see you soon, and thank you.